So before I start this video, I want to make it very clear that for those of you who are returning, obviously you'll know as soon as you begin to watch this, this isn't something that I talk about a whole lot on my channel. And for those of you who are new, I want to reiterate for you, this is not something that I talk about a whole lot on my channel. The it that I'm referring to is politics. And this isn't going to be a rant about one side or the other. I think most people are wrong about, well, everything. However, in the wake of all of the different things that have been happening in media, whether it be the Gina Carano firing or the reaction that a lot of people had to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier and the twists and turns that that one took, I started to see a lot of discourse happen on social media. And for the most part, social media did not disappoint, which meant that everything was pretty much cancer. I became acutely aware though, as I began to read through the comments and the diatribes and the back and forth, that a lot of people, number one, weren't objective, which is not a shock. It's the internet, especially when it comes to Twitter and YouTube. Everybody's dug into their own little hole. As I began to read through said cancer, however, I began to realize that there were a lot of basic realities that people didn't seem to understand about the content that was being created for them. It's not a shock on social media to see people converge into 1, 2, or 3 different camps about certain issues and dig into it and defend the position no matter how much they do or do not know about said position. It's okay to have a difference of opinion, but there are certain realities that you're not able to dispute. And like most things when it comes to social media, the truth was pretty much thrown to the wayside the second that any objective reality needed to be taken into account when it came to this specific conversation. In this video, I'm going to address 3 separate questions about specifically the film and TV show industry. These are the specific ones we're talking about. We're not going to talk about other mediums. We're only talking about movies and TV shows. Question 1, is the entertainment industry biased? The answer is yes. Of course. If you have 2 eyes, you can see that. If you have 1 eye, you can see that. If you have any of your basic senses, you can see, of course, the entertainment industry is biased completely to one side. It's not disputable. It is not up for debate. It is factual. In the 2016 election, from Hollywood specifically, roughly about $23 million in donations were made to candidates of either of the major political parties. Of that $23 million, $22 million was given to one party. Anybody with any brains when it comes to politics can tell me right now who it was that received most of that money. The Hillary Clinton campaign, or the Democratic Party, received $22 million in donations of about $2,700 from everybody within Hollywood. That includes producers, that includes actors, that includes the people who work there. All these people gave about $22 million in total during that campaign. The Republican candidate, Donald Trump, on the other hand, garnered probably less than $1 million in total donations from Hollywood, elites, workers, and producers, etc. And yes, there are some Republicans within Hollywood circles, albeit very, very few. Kelsey Grammer is a really well-known one. James Woods is pretty well-known, especially on Twitter. Jonathan Voight is pretty well-known. Caitlyn Jenner is another one. There are people within the circle of actors and Hollywood elites that are Republicans. They're not completely extinct, but they are dwarfed unbelievably by those who list themselves as liberals or progressives or Democrats or whatever label you want to use. As politics have become more and more vocal and Americans have become more comfortable expressing those views publicly so that everybody can hear them, you have seen the same thing happen in Hollywood, and the actual ideological lines between people have become more and more pronounced, and you're able to see this distinct contrast and the dominance of one specific political party within this industry more and more as time has gone on. Now, once again, public service announcement, I do not care even 1 iota about your political views. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. So if anybody ever tries to tell you that, no, of course it's not owned by a specific, stop them right there. That's a lie. And they know it's a lie if they know anything about the industry. It is owned by one specific party, and it's not inherently a good or a bad thing, as you'll find out in my video. I don't think it's inherently good or bad, but it is a reality. And attempting to explain to people that it's not a reality when it obviously is, sets up your argument and your thought process as fallible, and in fact, probably dishonest. Question 2, why is Hollywood so biased? This to me is a much more interesting question, way more than if the industry is actually biased in and of itself, because anybody with a brain knows that it is. I have to keep repeating that because there are going to be people who are fighting about it and trying to say that it's not. Of course it 100% is. You have an Alex Jones level tinfoil hat on if you don't think that. Figuring out why it is that people think this way and why it is that they are predisposed, or even if they are predisposed to thinking this way, can help us understand why it is that the dichotomy between left and right even exists within a specific example. I think that there are a couple different parts to this, and this is my opinion. So, of course, you can leave yours in the comments, that's totally fine, but this is my opinion that I'm talking about right now. When you think about the basic job of an actor, the job of an actor or an actress is to put themselves in the shoes of the character that they are playing and to, as accurately as possible, portray that character on screen for other people. This requires a couple different skills from the people who are actors and actresses and even directors and producers. This requires, first, that you need to have a very wide range of emotion that you're able to display or think of or create. Second, it requires that you're able to put yourself into another person's shoes. This is often called empathy, for lack of a better term, and the more that you're able to empathize with people, the better it is that you're able to display or emulate those behaviors and those specific mindsets. For those of you who don't really understand the differences in American politics, a very quick overview. On the right-hand side, we have Republicans, or conservatives, who focus more on individual rights, who focus more on protection, who focus more on personal responsibility and things of that nature when it comes to public policy. On the left-hand side, you have progressives, Democrats, and modern-day liberals who profess more of the communitarian style of governance, thinking of others, making sure that there are large social safety nets, things like that when it comes to public policy. Looking at these two different sides of the aisle, empathy would specifically apply and favor a more liberal-minded individual, which I think personally is why it is that you see a lot of people who are actors, actresses, producers, directors, things of that nature, they go over to the liberal aspect of the aisle. I think that tendency to have more empathy when it comes to public policy positions, and also to have that within the context and scope of their work, unites those two things and makes them a lot more apt to be correlated with one another. Another thing that I find is that a lot of times actors and actresses, for better or for worse, care a lot about what people think of them. They spend a lot of time online. They have large social followings. They have a lot of different aspects of their lives that are constantly scrutinized by people who are in the media, by their peers, by people who follow them. They're often the source of gossip when it comes to a lot of tabloids, things like that. They're constantly under the microscope 24/7. And so it makes a lot of sense to me when it comes to the entertainment industry, which is mostly a monolith to begin with. Those who enter the industry would probably very quickly adopt liberal, Democrat, progressive talking points because they care about what other people think of them. And if most everybody is a liberal already, they're going to join that group very, very quickly. On the other hand, because conservatives have a very individualistic worldview, they're going to focus more on the contrarian aspect of an industry wherein they are already contrarian for even being there. If anybody follows James Woods specifically on Twitter, lots of his Twitter is him fighting back and forth with people who have a left-leaning worldview and snapping at them back and forth and creating a very healthy dialogue. That was sarcasm for those of you who didn't know. Whether you're left or right, if you're on Twitter, you're probably not engaged in healthy dialogue. But really though, leaving all jokes aside, it makes sense to me that the individualistic, contrarian individuals who care about the individual rights of the people who they represent would be apt to be minorities within a group or an industry that cares about mass producing content and providing it to an extremely wide audience with a lot of varying characteristics and experiences. Now, real quick, so that I'm not misconstrued, that doesn't mean that conservatives don't have empathy, and it doesn't mean that liberals don't care inherently about individual rights. Although I would say, looking at Twitter, you can say that both of them have a lot of people who are like that on their sides. In order to understand the industry, you do have to understand that there are multiple reasons for people to think the way that they do and to act the way that they do, some of them more valid than others and some of them less valid than any others. Question 3. Can it be changed? When it comes to this question, I would stick with a never say never, but find it unlikely kind of thought process. There's a reason that I said the entertainment industry is biased, because I'm not just talking about movies and TV shows. Television networks are also biased. There are multiple left-wing outlets, and before you rage at me in the comments, these are left-wing outlets. To say otherwise is to lie. CNN is a left-wing outlet. MSNBC is a left-wing outlet. ABC is more centrist than it is anything else, but it still does lean a little bit left. The only cable television network that leans right, and is still mostly centrist but does lean right, is Fox News. That's not disputable. Most of the news networks and television shows that you watch and consume so that you can get your daily dose of what's going on in the world are left-leaning. They're not right-leaning. And since that's the case, you do have to understand that a lot of the issues and a lot of the things that people want to talk about are going to be controlled by people who have a specific agenda, a specific worldview. That's not inherently positive or negative. For example, I loved the Star Trek series, and specifically the new ones I like, with the exception of Beyond, because Star Trek Beyond is garbage. I will die on that hill. But Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness were actually really good films, and both of them were produced and directed by JJ Abrams, who is a rabid left-wing individual. Now, whether or not you agree with his politics, he made 2 really good movies. Objectively, they are good movies. At the same time, JJ Abrams was also responsible for Star Wars 7 and Star Wars 9, both of which were heaps of absolute smoldering hot garbage. And you can do the same thing on the other side. Mel Gibson directed Braveheart, and Braveheart was a good movie. Was it historically accurate? Absolutely freaking not. But it was still an entertaining movie. Objectively, it's an okay movie at worst. He also directed Apocalypto. For those of you who don't know what Apocalypto is, I don't blame you. It's a hodgepodge of hot mess. And that's the whole point. People of different sides of the aisle can both make good content. There's no rule that says that any one side or any one thought process can make good films while the other has to make bad films. That has almost nothing to do with making good content or good stories. Where the problem comes in is, again, where you're not focused on being story driven and you're more focused on being message driven. If it's more important to you that the propaganda get to the viewers than the actual story get to the viewers, that's where you run into garbage movies. Let's create a practical example real quick by using something that was in the news recently. Gina Carano being fired by Star Wars. Now listen, I'm not saying you have to support anything that Gina Carano says, and personally, I'm not a huge fan of Gina Carano's Twitter. It's not personally my cup of tea. But the show was her job. The whole point is that she was supposed to be part of the show. The Mandalorian is probably the best thing that has happened to Star Wars. When was Rogue One released? The Mandalorian offered the golden shovel to Disney, who had been digging themselves into this massive pit and couldn't get out of the garbage of 7, 8, 9, and the Han Solo movie. All these terrible decisions that they had made, and offered them a free way out. Whether you like her or not, Gina Carano was a very instrumental part of making that happen. She's a Republican. Pedro Pascal, the lead, is not a Republican. He's very far left. You didn't really hear anything about their politics, and they were totally chill together on screen. Isn't that interesting? And the only point in which The Mandalorian started running into trouble is when Disney decided to make the politics a really big sticking point for them and fired Gina Carano for expressing conservative views on her own social media platforms. Once they did that, all of a sudden, all the fans got pissed, and then Disney got left holding the bag, wondering why it was that everybody left them and didn't want to hang out with them anymore. The reason is because they decided that political messaging was more important than the story. And not to pick on Disney here, but it's the exact same thing with the most recent Falcon and the Winter Soldier series that they decided to release. Again, I'm not going to take a side on anything within the show in terms of political content, but it's not disputable that the political content is going to drive viewers away, and it is not story focused. It's not part of the original focus of the superhero genre. It isn't even an original part of the comics. And by throwing a political hand grenade like race relations into the middle of this TV show, where a lot of people just want to watch it for the story of the TV show, you start to create a lot of problems for a lot of people. So at the end of the day, can it be fixed? Yeah. In theory, anything can be fixed. Is it going to be fixed? It's highly unlikely, and a lot of that is due to the fact that there is a monolith that exists, and it's going to be rewarded because when it comes out, it's going to go to the news segments. They're going to do a whole lot of features about these films, and they're also a monolith. Like, if you sat down and you looked at all the movies who won an award this year at the Oscars, how many of them did you watch? You personally, how many of them did you watch? I didn't watch any of them because I don't want to watch that. Most of them are political messaging disguised as a movie that are meant to go out to the public, which no one even watched because no one wants to watch that. They're there for the story. They're not there for the message. So to wrap up the video, yes, there's a bias. 100% there's a bias. And there are good reasons for that bias. It's not just a whole bunch of idiots in Hollywood who are out of touch, although those are definitely a thing. And while it could potentially be fixed, it's not going to be fixed until the continuous cycle of benefiting one side of the aisle and giving them a whole bunch of money to make all these movies that nobody watches. Until that ends, it's probably not going to get fixed. Or unless one side of the aisle decides they're going to go ahead and start a whole bunch of movie studios, which is happening. That's something that is happening, but they don't have anywhere near the power that Hollywood does. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's that big of an issue. If you're a conservative, make conservative movies, make conservative TV shows. Wonderful. Do that for you. Don't make the same mistake where you create a whole bunch of political messages, but if you want conservatives to make content, then create a platform or a space where conservatives can make content. And if you're a liberal and you're wondering why it is that nobody watches your movies, understand half your audience is conservatives. The country is still 50% Republican and it's 50% liberal. So half your audience is going to be alienated either way, which is why it's always best to focus on the story and not put a whole bunch of political messaging in there. Because like I said at the beginning of the video, no matter your politics, you're probably wrong. Now, for those of you who are just looking to cause mayhem in the comments, please just go ahead and leave one down below and let me know what it is that you think about the subject. Am I right? Am I wrong? What's your take on the issue? Leave a like if you really enjoyed the content, and please subscribe for more content, and I'll see you guys later.